Many of you are aware of what design thinking is. Most of you aren't, and that's okay. This is meant to be an introductory session or module, and I'll talk about what those two different modules will cover. But today we'll do introduction to design thinking and developing empathy. I would like this to be a conversation, even though it's a large group. Typically, my classes are 20 to 30 students at Stanford, and mostly in person. So, except last term, I had my last two lectures online because of COVID-19 shutdown in the Bay Area. A small class size allows me to actually have more direct conversation. I would like to replicate that in these sessions. So, it may not be a good idea for all of you to unmute yourselves in one shot, at one time, of course. But if you have any questions or comments, you can do three things. You could actually type it in the chat window, and I'll request the TAs in the course to bring that up with me. Harshada, Adesh, it'll be great if you can say, Dr. Mel, there's a question that's come up or comment that's come up, or you can unmute yourself. I don't know if you have that option or not. Unmute yourself and ask a question. I would love for this to be as much a conversation as possible, rather than me lecturing. That's not as much fun for me. I like debate. You guys are very smart people, and I want to learn from you and hear your point of view. So we'll do this back and forth. And I'm going to create slots for that. We are starting a little bit late today, so if it's okay, I would like to go a little bit longer today. I know it's going to be pretty late for you, but you guys are IIT Bombay students, so what's night for you, right? This is the beginning of the day probably for you guys, except you're probably at home, so that may be a bit of a challenge. So without further ado, let me just get started. So this is the agenda for that today. I'll do a little bit of an overview of the program itself, what we hope to cover, and then we'll jump into design thinking. What is design thinking, and the biodesign process that I teach at Stanford. And then we'll do a workshop called Developing Empathy. This is where you will get to meet your team members, fellow team members that you've been pre-assigned to. And we do this at biodesign as well, by the way. When we recruit fellows, when we put them in teams, this 1-year fellowship that they do, we actually, we don't recruit for individual fellow. You may be a rock star in one particular area, medicine or engineering, but if you can't play as a team, you will likely not fit in with the program. So we do a pretty thorough job of recruiting for the team. My hope is that the team that we have formed for you for the next 4 weeks actually gels well together, and you're gonna work together on doing this module 1. We'll talk about at the end plans for the deliverable for week 1, and I would like this to be done before we meet next week, and your TAs are going to follow up with you on this. Okay. So here's the objective, and this is an objective I would use these objectives for pretty much any course that I teach at Stanford or here, or even some of the high school kids that I mentor, because I believe that there's tremendous amount of talent and capacity that you all have, no matter what age group you are, or what education levels you have. The important thing is, though, do you have all the tools you need? You are getting a lot of tools through your engineering education today, but is that enough? Many of you indicated in your application that you want to focus on innovation and entrepreneurship. The definition of innovation is to do something differently to solve a problem. That's one definition. There are many definitions, but that's a definition I use. That's different from invention. What we're going to focus on in this program, in this entire series of workshops, is design thinking as a methodology to innovate, not just to invent. Invent is a part of it. Invent is when you come up with a new idea to solve a problem, but it does not become a solution for the society until you take it all the way to its end zone, which is making an impact on the community or the society or the customers that you are developing the solution for. That's when it becomes innovation. So innovation is much more about a new way of doing things to solve a problem, okay? Not just to have an idea of solving a problem. So a lot of patent literature that you see, the inventions you see, They're inventions. They call inventions because they are an idea, but those haven't yet become a solution. So I would not call them innovation. Okay, so that's the definition that we're going to be using in the course in this program. And most important thing that I would like to focus on is that this program is all about understanding the unmet need, understanding the gap, the problem, understanding the problem. If you understand the problem really, really, really well, and we'll talk about what that means, you will be able to solve, or you'll have a really good shot at solving the problem. If you don't understand the problem fully well, you could have an idea of a solution, but by the time you get to the final stage of the solution, you'll realize it is not solving the problem that you thought you were trying to solve. And that's a big problem in our society, that a lot of ideas are based on not enough understanding of the problem, and that's why a lot of resources, and COVID-19 is a great example of what's going on, not just in India, even here in the US. So we'll talk about that. We'll talk about that as a context. Actually, let me skip this one. Sorry, that was an older slide. So here's the structure for our Design to Disrupt program. There are going to be 2 modules. You guys are part of module 1. Not all of you would want to or would be able to go on to module 2, which is a much more substantial part of the program. What we're trying to do in module 1 is really give you the fundamentals, the introduction to design thinking and the tools, and have you practice those tools and come up with potentially some unmet needs that you could potentially solve. But actually, it's in module 2 that you will really dive deeper, and you will actually work on specific unmet needs and specific solutions that hopefully you take it to a venture or an actual implementation. So that's how those 2 are separated out. Your time commitment is fairly minimal. We did say in the descriptions 20 hours of didactic instruction, but then we realized that we're only doing 4 weeks, not 8 weeks as we were originally thinking, 8 to 10 weeks. We don't have that much time. So it's going to be really 8 to 10 hours of didactic instruction, which is right here through Zoom. There is an expectation of 3 to 5 hours of work during these 4 weeks per week, because that's the only way you're going to really get full value out of this experience. You are being pre-assigned, and you'll see what your groups are. And we're going to use a lot of examples, and we're going to have some mentors that will come to these sessions that are going to talk about some aspects of design thinking and how you apply. Most of these are going to be focused on health, but health is just an application. Health area is just an application area for design thinking. You can apply design thinking to any number of disciplines, from environmental challenges to defense needs to food insecurity and so on. So it's not limited to healthcare only. In fact, design thinking originally came about for a broader set of unmet needs. Okay. By the way, if you have any questions as you are going through these slides, as I'm going through these slides, please type in your questions. Let me see if I can keep the chat window open in front of me here so that I can also see. Just give me a second. There you go. Now I can see anybody who chats. I mean, if you guys want to just say hi or something here, I can see the. Is everybody able to chat and type in the chat, Harshita and Adesh? They all have access to it. Okay, awesome. So feel free to use it. This way, there's a dialogue. Okay. So let me actually ask a quick question to everybody. Okay, there you go. Perfect. All right. So I just saw the first chat message. So I'm going to now quickly mention who the teams are, and then we're going to get into the topics themselves. So make a note when you see your name. and then let me just see. So here's and Harshita, please correct me if I have the wrong version. I swapped that out very quickly as your email came in or your message came in. But if I mentioned the team names incorrectly, please correct that. So and I'm not going to read everybody's name, but I'm just going to go through this. When we do the breakout session, the way breakout sessions are structured are around your teams, so you will get to know them each other anyway. But I'm just going to put this quickly in front of you all. So this is group 1, group 2. Each group, as you can notice, will have between 4 and 5 students, and they've been chosen to bring some diversity into the group. So not all the computer scientists would be in the same group, for example. Hopefully not. Not all the graduate students will be in the same group. So there's a distribution, some method to the madness, but there's some randomness as well. Which is probably a good way to structure groups. This is group 3 and group 4. Take a look at your names. Group 5, group 6. I hope I didn't go too quickly in the previous one. Yeah, if I go too fast, please weigh in. If you don't see your name, you can message Adesh or Harshita, and they'll tell you which group you're part of. Just remember your group names.
Yeah, we'll drop a mail also. So
Okay, sounds good. Perfect. And then group 9. So there are 9 groups, guys. Okay, and so you've been all assigned to these groups, and these are the folks that you're going to be working with for the next 4 weeks in these breakout sessions. So let me now jump in. Actually, I think this was all about preamble, but let me now jump into the topic at hand itself. So why do we need design thinking? Can somebody tell me why, having heard a little bit about design thinking so far? I've not even told you the full version of what design thinking is. I'm not giving you any sort of examples or whatever, but I've given you a quick review. Can somebody tell me why design thinking is needed? I mean, I have some answers here, but I want to hear your thoughts on that as well. Why do we need design thinking? And please chat in. Please type in the chat or unmute yourself and talk. So I'll speak to that couple of these, and then you can add your voice to it. So first of all, one of the biggest problems that we have with folks that are working on solutions is there's a jump to solution. My own students that haven't gone through design thinking at Stanford, before they take the class, they are brilliant engineers or scientists or computer scientists, or they could come from other disciplines. They tend to rush to a solution because Silicon Valley is all about entrepreneurship, and there's a certain rush that you get by quote unquote solving a problem. So you could just come up with a new app for something, right? Or a new AI ML algorithm for something else. But the challenge is, if you don't fully understand the problem, you're going to come up with a solution that may not be the right, focusing on the right need. So your priorities in solving the problem would be misplaced. So there could be like 5 different problems that you could potentially solve. You pick one because you fell in love with it. If you didn't dive deep enough into it, you would find later on that the one that you picked wasn't the most important one. It's some other one. Hopefully you discover that as part of it. But that's the second part of it. Your time and energy and your resources are more optimally spent when you really know the problem you want to go after. And there's this last one is a version of code by Carol Lewis, and it says, if you don't know where you're going, you'll get there. It's really about, if you are unclear about what you're trying to address, the problem you're trying to address, by the time you get to the destination, you would still be unclear about what you're trying to address. And that's a huge problem, especially if you want to be an entrepreneur. That's a huge issue, okay? So I see some responses here, which okay, it takes a holistic approach to any problem. This is Zaid saying that, giving a sense of understanding from the perspective of the people involved and outside. Exactly, that's right. That's exactly what design thinking is. And it's very much focused on the user, the human being at the end of the innovation. And it's much more about empathy and much more about inclusion. Absolutely. In fact, one of the things that we're going to focus on in this program next 4 weeks are the underserved, not folks like you and me, but folks that, the migrant workers who had to go from Delhi to their villages in Uttar Pradesh. What were the problems that they dealt with? If you're solving for them, if we had in our governments, folks that were taught design thinking, I suspect they would not have planned the shutdown the way they did, because, and it's not a political comment, it's just a frank comment on everybody, all stakeholders, state and federal government. The way that that was instituted, it really didn't account for that unmet need. That there wasn't that empathy wasn't part of that, and that's a big problem. So putting them in the center of your solution is really, really critical. Absolutely. And I think Amreen's comment was about creative and innovation prospects that learners face. That's true. So I'm going to go to the history of design thinking very quickly. This is actually not a very old field, but it is rooted in some of the original product design concepts. That's why design thinking, the term design thinking. It's originated in the 50s and 60s, but it really took hold when a group of 30 or so designers actually came together in late 80s. And the plans for D School at Stanford, if you've heard of D School, it's like the hallowed institution that really a lot of design thinking ideas came from. And David Kelly, who co-founded that D School at Stanford and IDEO, which is one of the premier design firms, he basically, quote unquote, wrote the book on design thinking, built upon all the work that had been done before. But human-centered design was the gist of it. BioDesign program was founded, actually it was founded before D School, but it is influenced by design thinking, and we'll talk a little bit about that. But fast forward to today, 20 years later, design thinking is now part of every single business school curriculum. There's not a good business school out there, not a single one that does not have design thinking in its curriculum, because they all realize it's a really useful tool. In fact, in my own work at Orbis, the company that I run, we use design thinking pretty extensively to help solve their major business challenges in health technology industry. So where is it today and where is it going? So design thinking has become the buzzword. Sometimes it's too much of a buzzword. So I want you all to be careful about that. Hopefully you are not here just because it's a buzzword. Hopefully you're here because you understand that it's an important tool. It is a tool. It's not the only tool. There are other tools. Even though I'm a design thinker myself, I would argue that there are times when design thinking may not be adequate. And I'll give you an example. If you are trying to solve a problem of a woman who's going through postpartum hemorrhage, bleeding during childbirth in a remote part of Rwanda, okay? Now, she and her local healthcare worker are the key stakeholders. Her family is a stakeholder, but so are the doctors 100 kilometers away who will ultimately do surgery on her. So is the government that's actually making sure that there are adequate resources or supply of healthcare solutions to this woman. So would be NGOs that are doing healthcare work in that region. So are WHO and so on. So there are lots of stakeholders, which means it's part of a healthcare. We're part of, this woman is part of a system. So even though ultimate beneficiary is this woman who's bleeding during childbirth and you need to find a solution to stop that bleeding, the solution that will work the best is not just what is good enough technically, clinically for that woman. It also has to meet a lot of other constraints based on who's buying, who's choosing, who's implementing. So there's a new field emerging from design thinking called systems thinking. And we'll talk a little bit about that later in the program. But that's the kind of arc where we're going. Where the user is not an individual. In fact, BioDesign program actually talks about that. User is not an individual doctor, but it's actually the system, healthcare system itself. Okay. People are using design thinking for sales. They're using it for future. A really good example is COVID-19. Everybody is confused about what the future is going to be, what the new normal is going to be. I did this experiment called the rubber band experiment in the early days of COVID-19, first couple of months. Rubber band experiment said there are 3 states let's assume that our society is a rubber band. And what happens during COVID-19 is our rubber band is stretched. Now you have three scenarios. Number one, rubber band stretches back to its original state, or goes back to its original state after the stretching is done. Second is that it stretches and goes back to a new steady state, a new state of the rubber band that we did not anticipate, or we didn't know, or we were not at. And third one is that it remains in a stretched position for an inordinate amount or indefinite amount of time. So that becomes the transient state, becomes a new steady state. But that understanding of what that future state is very, very challenging. How do you predict the future? There's a coach for Yankees, New York Yankees, which is a baseball team, Yogi Berra, who had these really crazy sentences like, if you come to a fork, take it. That was those were the Yogi Berra sayings. But one of the things that he said was, it's very hard to make predictions, especially about the future. So no matter how closely you look into the crystal ball, it's very hard to know what the future is going to be. But if you have some tools that allow you to think about what that future is, then I think you can take a guess, and you can actually at least start to take appropriate action, whether it's future of climate, it's future of the planet's security, and so on. But future thinking is design thinking is starting to play a role in futures thinking, what you see on the right side of the slide. So the reason I'm sharing this with you guys is that you guys are going to do a bunch of really interesting things in your lives, right? Understand this as a tool that has significant applications across different aspects of your professional lives. It's not just limited to coming up a new medical device. Okay, all right. So with that, I'm just going to quickly talk about design thinking itself. So there are 5 major stages of design thinking. This is the classical design thinking definition. This is what David Kelly came up with when he first proposed a structured framework for design thinking. 5 aspects are empathize, define, ideate, prototype, and test. Empathize is all about getting into the minds and hearts and context of the user, whatever your user is. It could be a system, it could be an individual. If I'm designing for an iPhone, a new smartphone, I would focus on a user's need, me, right, or you as an individual. So empathize with that individual, that user. In some cases, user could be a system, and then define what the needs are, what the problem that you're trying to solve is. Okay. And empathize, first put yourself in the shoes, and there's a very structured way to do it, and then understand and define what the need is, articulate it explicitly. Once you've done that, then you start to ideate around it, come up with ideas to solve that unmet need or that problem. Okay, that's the third stage. Once you come up with an idea, now you need to actually build something on that, right? You have an idea, it's on paper, or it's on whiteboard, or whatever. Come up with a prototype. You build a prototype that reflects that idea that you have. Now you have a prototype, you need to test to see how well does it solve the problem. Okay, so you started with getting in the minds of the user, understand and define their need, their need, basically, their problem, come up with an idea for a solution, prototype that solution, and then ultimately test that solution. You test it, you find that it works really, really well first time around, great, you commercialize it or implement it. But you find that it's not perfect. It actually needs some tweak. You go back to ideate, prototype, test, that cycle. So one of the hallmarks of design thinking is not only deep understanding of the problem, but also an iteration of the solution. You learn by doing, you learn by prototyping and testing, and you continue to sort of iterate through that cycle. Okay. So let me just do a quick video, and please, Harshita and Adesh, tell me if this is visible and audible or not. I'm just going to play that.
So the video is not audible.
Okay.
The video is not visible.
Okay.
It's audible.
Design thinking is a 5-step process to come up with meaningful ideas that solve real problems for a particular group of people. The process is taught in top design and business schools around the world. It has brought many businesses lots of happy customers and helped entrepreneurs from all around the world to solve problems with innovative new solutions.
I'm going to play it now.
Design thinking is a 5-step process to come up with meaningful ideas that solve real problems for a particular group of people. The process is taught in top design and business schools around the world. It has brought many businesses lots of happy customers and helped entrepreneurs from all around the world to solve problems with innovative new solutions. Step 1. Empathize. The purpose of Step 1 is to conduct interviews that give you an idea about what people really care about. We need to empathize with their situation. For example, if you want to help old people, you might find that they want to keep the ability to walk around. In your conversations, they might share with you different ways they can do that. Later into the interview, you'll want to dig a little deeper, look for personal stories or situations where things became difficult. Ideally, you redo the process with many people with the same problem. Step 2. Define the problem. Looking at the interviews, you can now understand the actual needs that people are trying to fulfill with certain activities. One way to do that is to underline the verbs or activities that the people mentioned when talking about their problems, like going for a walk, meeting old friends for tea, or simply going grocery shopping around the corner store. You might realize it's not so much about going out, but more about staying in touch. After your analysis, formulate a problem statement. Some elderly are afraid to be lonely. They want to stay connected. Step 3. Ideate. Now focus only on the problem statement and come up with ideas that solve the problem. The point is not to get a perfect idea, but rather to come up with many ideas, like unique virtual reality experiences, senior-friendly hoverboards, or a modified pushcart. Whatever it is, sketch up your best ideas and show them to the people you are trying to help, so you can get their feedback. Step 4. Prototype. Now take a moment to reflect on what you have learned from your conversations about the different ideas. Ask yourself, how does your idea fit in the context of people's actual lives? Your solution could be a combination of a new idea and what is already being used. Then connect the dots, sketch up your final solution, and go build a real prototype that's just good enough to be tested. Step 5. Test. Now test your prototype with actual users. Don't defend your idea in case people don't like it. The point is to learn what works and what didn't, so any feedback is great. Then go back to ideation or prototyping and apply your learning. Repeat the process until you have a prototype that works and solves the real problem. Now you are ready to change the world or open shop. To experience design thinking firsthand, do the free Virtual Design Thinking crash course from Stanford's D-School right now. You will learn to design a new gift-giving experience. Find the link and a guide for facilitators in the description below. After you are done, share your experience and gift idea in the comments. To learn more about creative and critical thinking, check out our other Sprouts videos.
Yeah, so hopefully that gave you a good idea about what design thinking is and how these 5 steps are implemented. I want to pause here and see if there are any questions about any of these steps. If the test phase fails, can there be an issue in the first 2 phases? Absolutely, that's a great question. You know, if you do empathize and define really, really well, likelihood of you be successful at the end of the test phase is higher. You know, and failures come in different shapes and sizes, right? And failures could be really spectacular failures where we completely missed the need. That means the empathize and define phase was not done well. On the other hand, it may just reveal that there may be certain aspects of it that don't really work very well. And so in which case you may have to go back to ideate and prototype. How you decide whether you have gotten the empathize and define appropriately or not depends on the feedback that you get from your stakeholders. Let's say in that video we were talking about seniors, right? You came up with a VR solution, right, for them, and you showed it to them, and they say, this is very interesting what I'm seeing, but I don't really know how to use this. I don't know how to put a phone inside that, and I don't know how to actually use it. So if you guys step away, I wouldn't know what to do with it. So here, you may have addressed the empathy and define part to a certain extent, but somewhere in the define part, you did not put enough constraints around what kind of solutions would be most viable with that group. Okay, so it is always a good idea to question yourself whether your empathy and define part was correct or not. But once you are reasonably certain that you really considered all aspects, it's really about the iteration between test, ideate, and prototype. That's a great question. So this is Ayan's question. Solving problems is a very old activity, but you earlier stated that origin lies in the 1950s. Are there alternative? Yes, there are tons of paradigms actually. Design thinking has taken off because it focuses very directly on the user. So in that sense, it's slightly different. In most other problem solving frameworks, the focus was on the problem itself rather than who the problem was affecting. And if you're talking about problem solving for space, for example, that doesn't necessarily involve a human being, many of those frameworks are better. But if you're talking about a user whose needs you're trying to solve, user-centric design or design thinking actually becomes a much more viable paradigm. And I'm happy to share with the group some of the other paradigms that exist for problem solving. Absolutely. If you have more than one ideas, then how do we choose? That's exactly what we're going to talk about in this course. That's you're setting it up for very well for the future sessions that we're exactly going to talk about. How do you choose? And I remember if you guys, I don't know if you heard this during the video, they said ideas not to come up with one, ideas to come up with many. The more that you come up with, the more needs you come up with in the ideate, the empathize and define phase. The more problems that you identify there, the better would be your selection of which ones do you want to go after. You want to choose from a list of them that you have defined, not just pick one and fall in love with it. There's a major issue in entrepreneurial world where we fall in love with one particular thing. And it's not necessarily driven by the rigor of why that is the most important thing. Often we trust our instincts, and your instincts are good. I mean, instincts come from experience. So there's a reason why you should trust your instincts. But if you're purely going by instinct, there's likelihood of instincts being wrong. So what this is providing is a framework, a rigorous framework to actually, base your instinctual sort of leaning towards. And in terms of how do you choose from more than one ideas, you apply a very structured framework for that, and we'll discuss that. You will need to bring in your personal biases into it, but you do that explicitly, right? Right now we say, I have a strong feeling as a brilliant entrepreneur that I am, or innovator that I am, I have a really good idea as to direction we should go in. That's completely relying upon instincts. What we're going to talk about in this program is how do you actually allow rigor of a framework like design thinking to support in the process. So you can still apply your instincts or your biases, but do that in an explicit way, saying that I'm biased. I'm biased towards an AR solution, or I'm biased towards a new app. Okay, you could do that, but know fully well that you are biasing it. Okay, be honest about it. And it's okay to be biased because, you all have your backgrounds, you all have your expertise. It's okay to bias yourself, but only do that after you've done that honest, rigorous framework the way we are talking about.